This is the BTOWN podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome into another episode of the BTOWN podcast. I'm Bill Bartholomew. A pleasure to have you on board as always. Today I welcome back to the pod Democratic candidate for governor, Helena Buonnano Foulkes. And we are now we're actually less than 2 months away from primary day, which is somewhat shocking. I don't know. It feels like we're in some kind of time warp, honestly. And we're like a month away from early voting. So things really ramping up here in terms of political season. We've been progressively heading in that direction over the last several weeks. And, as I told you, we're going to be really just focused on races for the most part from now until Election Day in November. Of course, we'll have the normal monthly segments that we always do, but a lot of one-on-one conversations with candidates coming your way here on the pod, as well as a series of debates/forums that'll include governor, lieutenant governor, mayor of Providence, general treasurer, and congressional District 2, all Democratic primary debates that'll take place sometime in the month of August. I'll have more details on that for you as we move along. Also, coming up this weekend, Newport Folk Festival. So I'll have tons of coverage for you across social media. Just find me on whatever, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, whatever it is, at Bill Bartholomew. I'll be at the festival. I'm going to be doing some interviews, so on and so forth. And I have a theme that I'm going to try to wrap up. I don't know if I'm going to do it in a podcast or I'm going to try to write this piece that I have in mind that'll kind of focus in on how the Newport Folk Festival, this institution, obviously in Rhode Island, but more broadly speaking in terms of just the arts world in general, reflects the socio-political moment that we're in. And not just in terms of X artist spoke out on this particular issue or that particular issue, but just in terms of, I want to talk to people in the crowd. I want to talk to fellow artists that are performing. I want to talk to organizers and producers and observe, obviously, and reflect on some of the performances themselves. I'm not here to analyze, the performance of a certain drummer or something like that, but just to kind of sit back and say, hey, how does this sort of major cultural event serve as a mirror for this moment that we're in? Let's be honest about it, folks. This is nuts. This is absolutely mind-blowing and mind-numbing at so many levels with what's going on in geopolitics. Obviously, here in our own country, we're seeing a renewed impact of COVID-19. There's so many different things. And, of course, it's tough sometimes to just sit back and try to make sense of it at any level. You know what I mean? For me, and I think for a lot of you, music and arts and community, if nothing else, is a place where, amongst other things, you can sort of congregate and gain an understanding of, allies and what the world kind of needs more of. And I think we'll find that, I'm hoping to find that Newport Folk Festival, and I'm just interested in reflecting on that. So that's a long way of saying I'm going to have some coverage and some content coming out of Newport Folk. Plus, I'll be performing each night at an unofficial but still related after event that'll be going on all 3 nights. Well, actually, Thursday, Friday, Saturday in Newport. If you're interested in attending these after parties, bill@ripodcast.com. I'm happy to give you the details for that. All right. Without further ado, welcoming back Helena Buonnano Foulkes for another conversation here on Rhode Island's podcast of record, Bartholomew Town. All right, so we are here with Helena Buonnano Foulkes, and this is our second time having a conversation. So listeners are probably by now at least familiar with who you are and what you're all about at a certain level. But for those who are not, I guess just sort of summarize, your 30-second hello, this is who I am and why I'm running for governor.
Okay, good. Well, hi, Bill. It's really nice to be back, and actually this time in person. So, yes, I'm Helena Buonnano Foulkes. I was born and raised in Rhode Island, in Providence. I'm the oldest of 5, and I've never been a politician. I grew up, came back to Rhode Island after school and started working at CVS. I spent 25 years there. I'm probably most proud of the decision I got to lead to get us out of cigarettes. And I think in many ways that's what the state needs right now is real leadership. Someone knows how to pull people together and get things done. And I would be honored to serve the people of Rhode Island.
So I guess in terms of that, in terms of coalition building, that's really what you're talking about is trying to find a way to thread the needle between, the moderates in the Democratic Party, the small but present Republican Party, and then progressives, I would guess, to be able to pull people together. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I talk to Rhode Islanders around the state, no one starts with a political point of view. They start with the things they worry about. And so that's always what's grounded me is what are we aiming for? What are the big goals we have together? Where I usually start, and I think it's very relevant for politics, is finding places we can win together. And so, I'll give you an example. When I was building the extra care program at CVS, it may seem like an interesting example, but we had these very ambitious goals. And I remember telling my mentor about them and saying this was just going to be amazing in 4 years. And he stopped me dead in my tracks. He said, Helena, if you're not producing results until 4 years from now, your program's not going to be around. You got to go figure out how to create wins for people inside the company sooner than that. And so I think that state government is very similar. I do know how to work with all kinds of people. I had to throughout my career. I started in a cubicle at CVS. It was a very ordinary job, and I worked my way up over around. I ended up running the largest division, so I had 200,000 people working for me. But I only got there because I knew how to work with people, and I knew how to listen really well. I also am very good, honestly, at finding great talent and getting people around me who are smarter than me. And I one of the things I've said to many groups of people that I meet with is I would take EQ over IQ any day. And what I mean by that is finding people who really know how to listen, understand what are those common points of interest and how do we get things done is much more effective at producing results than getting the smartest person in the room. And so that's a leadership philosophy that's important to me. And I think because I don't come to this from a background of politics, I'm really entering this race and want to serve because I love this state so much and I do want to get things done. I want it to be the state where people are really proud of us. We have so many things going for us, yet people want to make sure their kids have a great education. They can afford to live here. They have great futures. And so to me, that transcends party. And I know that I can pull people together to make sure that we're really working on behalf of everyone in the state.
Yeah, you mentioned two topics there that are certainly going to be a top of mind right now. One is education. The other is housing. Let's start with housing. I know that you've rolled out plans and so on and so forth, but summarize that right now. We've seen an incredible increase in both the purchase price of homes and in terms of rentals. It's a one-bedroom apartment in Providence right now is averaging about $1,875. That's up 25% from last year. I mean, there's all kinds of numbers you can run on the purchase price of homes. It's astronomical right now, and a lot of people feel like they're left out. There is development, but the development doesn't always seem to reach the people who seem to be left behind. What's your solution to that?
Yeah, it's a really thorny problem, and you don't solve it overnight. But I approach this problem from the big issue here is we're 20,000 units short in the state. So if you look at the last decade, we've produced the least new housing supply per capita of any state in the country. You don't fix that overnight. But the things that I would be focused on in the short term, I would have worked much faster and harder to make sure that all the money we got from the federal government to make sure people didn't get evicted from their homes and their apartments got out faster and sooner.
That's the rent relief, Rhode Island.
Rent relief, exactly. In the short term, one of my proposals was to make sure that if people were living in multifamily housing, that they got a $500 tax relief from the government, because I do want to encourage people, and I know that's where a lot of the burden is. In the long term, we have to have solutions that really encourage the production of more supply. That could look like accessory dwelling units. So, for example, Massachusetts and California both allow people to build, let's call them, in-law apartments above their garages. And it's a great solution, oftentimes for older people, because they no longer need the big house. They can move into the smaller apartment and rent out the bigger house. So it increases supply pretty quickly. We also have the opportunity to increase our match on federal low-income housing loans. So we are one of only a few states in New England, one of only 2 states in New England that doesn't have a match on that. And that would also increase our supply. So there are a lot of things that we could do together. It's a big problem. People have great ideas, and I would be able to pull those people together and say, what do we do in the short, medium, and long term to go attack the problem?
There's some municipalities, Portsmouth comes to mind, that are well below the affordable housing threshold, if you will. There's also zoning regulations that prohibit the development of multifamily homes in some municipalities. Those are municipal challenges. Do you have the relationships with municipal leaders to be able to make moves one city or town at a time to try to make things come to some kind of equilibrium on a statewide basis in terms of the number of affordable houses per town or city, the zoning regulations in terms of developing multifamily homes, or anything else that goes into the construction of properties that you would deem lowercase a affordable?
Yeah, look, my experience has been really positive with everyone I've been meeting across every city and town, and people want someone who's a good listener and solutions oriented. One of the things that I could care less about is getting credit for anything. I want to produce for people, and I think that people sense that when they meet with me. But to give you another example, one of my ideas is to make sure that if we have homes that were built before 1980, you could allow them to be turned into multi-unit housing. That's a very simple fix that would, again, increase supply. So this is finding things that can work statewide, and then, to your point, working with municipalities to create both a carrot and stick environment where we move things along. Everyone cares about this, and I think people are really worried about it. For me, the story was really crystallized when I met a man who's a teacher. He's in his 60s, and he said to me, Helena, I bought my first house 40 years ago. And at that time, it cost me 2 times my salary. My house did. I now have 3 sons who all want to buy homes in Rhode Island. It's going to cost them 5 times their salary. So I hear it everywhere. We have to come together and find new solutions for it.
One thing, last question on housing, one thing that also comes up is short-term rentals. There's some regulations that are being implemented in places like Newport, but then there's situations like Middletown where they're kind of kicking the can down the road, at least the town council is, in terms of dialing it in. Do you think that we're not talking about somebody who has a home and they say, look, I'm going to rent out a unit as a short-term bed and breakfast type environment, but these folks that are buying properties and turning them into micro hotels, should that be allowed in Rhode Island?
I think ultimately we have to take care of Rhode Islanders. So the most important thing would be to make sure that the housing we have is serving people of Rhode Island, not just groups of partying young people coming from out of state. So right. I don't know what all the answers are there, but I have met a lot of people in the local municipalities, for example, who are doing great work around that.
Mm-hmm. On education, I mean, there's so many. We could start anywhere. We could look at numbers. We could compare and contrast to Massachusetts. We could go within the state and say, well, why is East Greenwich and why do East Greenwich and Barrington have different numbers than Charahoe and Ponegantza? I mean, we could look at it that way. But even just looking at it on a global basis, what does Rhode Island need to do right now to develop a workforce and avoid the brain drain that seems to come from those who kind of make it out of our education system, if you will? How do we both get our talent developed here and then retain that talent?
Yeah. So it's something I hear in every single zip code I'm in, and it often comes down to this notion of COVID learning loss. So if you look at the scores across all of Rhode Island, today only 33% of our kids pass their reading grade level tests and 20% in math. So it is a big problem. I think it's a moral responsibility we have for our children. I also see it as a huge economic opportunity. And one way to bring that to life is, as I was recruiting hundreds of people to come work for me over my years at CVS, most of them, the lion's share of them, ended up buying homes in Massachusetts. And they did that for only one reason: great public schools. So we're missing out on a tax base, which then increases our revenue base and allows us to reinvest in education. So I think it's a virtuous cycle if we get our act together. And look, it's a big thorny problem. This is why I think politicians don't really go after this one. You don't hear much from other candidates about what specifically they would do. I won't bore your listeners with all my ideas, but I'd love them to go look at helenafoulkes.com. I put a lot of thought into my education proposal. I was suggesting that we spend $500 million of the $1.1 billion ARPA dollars on education, another $300 million in a school construction bond, and then another $200 million that we would either have to fund ourselves or maybe get from Build Back Better if something happens there for universal pre-K. There are many things, but what I would say is, first of all, there's a huge mental health issue going on in our classroom today. Kids have the stress level among both kids and teachers is very, very high. There's a burnout factor. So I have many thoughts about increasing support from a mental health perspective in our schools. Also, as an example, in K through 3 classrooms, I'd love to see every single one of those classrooms have a teaching assistant, partly to help with mental health and behavioral issues, but partly also because we can create a really great pipeline of future teachers, many of whom could be more diverse and represent the students that they're teaching. I've also proposed that we expand the Rhode Island Promise program so that if you did 4 years of school in Rhode Island to become a teacher and committed to teaching for 4 years in Rhode Island, we'd pay your tuition. We really need to increase our supply of teachers. I think that would help. So I've got a lot of ideas. I'm really honestly so blown away by the teachers that I meet and the parents that I meet because they're asking for much more help. They've got great ideas. Back to your point earlier, I know how to pull people together and listen to them and help take action on the ideas that they have. You know, one of the questions I always ask people when I meet with them is I say, if you were governor tomorrow, tell me one thing you'd do. Mm-hmm. And I get incredible ideas. Last weekend, I met with a woman in Cranston who's a teacher, and I asked her that question. And she said to me, you know, one thing, I would take all our buildings are crumbling, but I would simply put up smart whiteboards in every single classroom as a way of showing our kids we're modern and forward-leaning. And I thought, what a great idea. That's not that complicated. So I think with a lot of things in life, we tend to overcomplicate them, and creating a series of quick wins so teachers and kids and parents feel the support we're giving them while we're aiming for the bigger, thornier things is the way I would approach that.
Very interesting. Let's look at the race itself in terms of we're now less than 2 months away from primary day. What have you learned, number one, just in terms of being, now you are a politician, you're out in the community and meeting people, and you see the signs up and the television commercials, you're in the thick of the machine. What have you learned about this process, and what have you learned that will pivot your approach going into the final 7 weeks here?
Well, I'm loving this part of it. You know, when I started the process, I was stuck in Zoom. And so It was a strange thing to be launching a campaign and not be able to be out. What I'm personally finding is people know me now. They've seen my ads. They like my ads. They tell me that. And I'm finding that they're open to sharing with me because they feel comfortable with me. And that is, I think, part of what has always been part of my leadership style is I love really probing into what are the things that I could do to make your life better. So I'm going everywhere. I'm going to lots of community events, every part of the state. I'm so motivated. I'm inspired. My adrenaline is rushing because I feel a very strong sense of conviction of really helping people.
There's a lot of undecided voters in the most recent polling that's out there, and it's a little behind our interview right now, but it does show that Secretary Gorbea and Governor McKee have a pretty decided lead as the frontrunners, but you're right there, and you've climbed enormously in terms of the previous poll that was available. Your opponents, Dr. Luis Daniel Munoz and Matt Brown, are in the 1 to 5% range, and again, there's a lot of undecided voters. It's always a snapshot in time. It's always tough to rely on that for sure, but how do you close that gap here? And when you look at Secretary Gorbea and Governor McKee, for example, today Secretary Gorbea is having a press conference at the State House on abortion. Governor McKee's out in both his official capacity as governor and on a campaign side, rolling out TV ads. He's out in front of the media every single day out in front of the state. How do you close it?
Well, I want to start by saying I remember vividly, it was just a couple weeks ago when the poll came out and we were waiting for it, and we were all huddled in my office, and I have a whole bunch of great young interns and vibrant people working for me. And so 10 o'clock, the poll numbers came out, and we all just started hooping and hollering and high-fiving because to come up that much in a month, as the headline said, we were surging, and that's pretty tremendous given that people hadn't known me before. So to be within a margin of error of the governor, who has served really most of his life in public service, and Secretary Gorbea, who's also been doing this for a very long time, is encouraging for us. We feel momentum. We're excited. There's an enthusiasm. You walk in our office, and there's a great energy. But look, I just have to keep doing what we're doing, which was we have a tremendous number of people who are undecided. The two politicians are pretty much static. They are where they were last time a poll came out, so they're not picking up any momentum. People want change. People are worried. They're looking at a potential recession. They're looking at gas prices. And to have a sitting governor telling us all how great everything is doesn't feel like their lives, their experience right now. And so I need to build on the fact that now people know me from TV, but I need to look them in the eyes and to let people understand that they can trust me. They can trust me to do something that would really be beneficial for them. And so we're excited, and with 30% or more of people undecided, those are the ones I think we have a really big opportunity with.
What would you do on day one in terms of the economy right now? We probably are heading towards a recession. There are certainly models that suggest we're actually not. You can look at gas prices coming down a little bit.
Yep.
How do we really know at this point where it's trending? When there's conflict amongst various analysts. But one thing's for sure is that inflation's real, and that people's income is stagnant at this point, coupled with the fact that we've talked about housing prices and all of that. What does day one look like that is different than a McKee or a Gorbea or, frankly, a Brown or Munoz administration in terms of, hey, we understand where you're struggling, and in spite of recession, potential recession, and in spite of inflation, so on and so forth, here are the economic vehicles that we're going to deploy to ensure that you have a better quality of life?
That's such a good question, because I think it's the most important question for voters right now. Well, first and foremost, I think with a recession lurking, and to your point, inflation way outpacing what people are making, I want to figure out how to get money back in people's pocketbooks. And I want to take a really hard look at state government and make sure that for every dollar we're spending, it's going to the people who should be getting service, but where it's stuck in bureaucracy, that we're freeing up that money. And I had proposed, with a $900 million surplus that we just came out of, that we do a $500 tax back to everyone earning $100,000 or less, because I'd like to get money back in people's pocketbooks when times are tough. So while Nellie Gorbea has proposed raising taxes, and she positioned it as a corporate tax increase, but when you really look at it, thousands of small businesses would see a tax increase under the Nellie tax. And I hear from these small businesses every day. They could look like Cellos or Dells. There's small businesses who say the last thing I need is a tax increase. I'm going to have to pass it on or lay people off. So I think quite the opposite. I would be looking to figure out how to make us more competitive to our neighboring states, how to put more money back in people's wallets. So I think that's mission critical. I also really believe, this is now comparing myself to Governor McKee, state government has to work for people. And one of the things I hear from small businesses is they are mired in bureaucracy and red tape. And this is an economic issue, because if a small business owner is spending half his day going to the Department of Taxation and various other departments solving discrepancies and not driving her business, that's a big problem. I talked to one person who owns 3 restaurants, and this really motivated me, because he said to me, Helena, 2 of them are in Pawtucket and 1 of them is in Worcester, Mass. When I opened my second restaurant in Pawtucket, I had to go to 13 different websites and locations to get all the paperwork to open my restaurant. When I opened my restaurant in Worcester, Mass., I had a concierge service with one-stop shop. It took me just one person to get everything I needed. So I am hearing a groundswell from small business owners who say, just make it easy for us. So those are the 2 things I would do day one, is figure out how to attack those problems. From a longer-term perspective, part of my economic strategy is to build on our strengths. And one of the biggest strengths we have in Rhode Island is 400 miles of ocean, the ocean state that we are. And I'm proposing that we lean into the blue economy. We have URI School of Oceanography. We have the Naval War College, where the U.S. government spends a tremendous amount of money on underwater research. And so just as a decade ago, Massachusetts got together, its government officials, its business leaders, and also universities got together, and there was a $1 billion bond to lean into life sciences. I'm proposing a $250 million bond where we lean into the blue economy in Rhode Island, and we really become the leader. Remember, we're the first in an offshore wind farm. So how do we take that advantage and really drive something so for the long term, we have an economy here that is built on a very strong foundation?
Yeah, that's certainly something that has started to creep in even during the Raimondo administration. Creep in sounds like it's a negative connotation, but has started to become more and more visible, at least from the Commerce Rhode Island side. That includes offshore wind, smart bay, you could even argue tourism, fisheries,
Yes.
research and development, making URI a global leader, which it already is, and that's in oceanography. But all of these things combined, a lot of people say, because I talk about the blue economy all the time on either the podcast or on radio here and whatever it is, and people will literally say, well, what is the blue economy? Yeah. How does that benefit me? How does it benefit the average Rhode Islander?
It's great jobs for the average Rhode Islander. It's looking at the entrepreneurial base that exists today that didn't exist a decade ago and saying, how do we build more of these? How do we, one of my ideas is a tax incentive for entrepreneurs so that we encourage entrepreneurs to come to Rhode Island to set up, or the existing Rhode Islanders. It's creating an environment where it is a robust economy and our kids don't have to leave the state for great paying jobs. And that's the ultimate hope as I talk to most parents. They say, gosh, my kids, my grandchildren, they love living here. It's beautiful. We have so many things going for us. But if they want to have a great career, they often have to leave. And I think this is our biggest platform for making sure that Rhode Islanders have great futures and great jobs.
I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the arts here in Rhode Island, where I feel, as certainly, listeners know that I'm involved in that. It's half of my life, basically, as a singer, songwriter, musician. The power of RISD and so on and so forth is real. But there's also vehicles that can be deployed in housing and tax incentives and in ways to retain and attract the arts. We see what Providence Performing Arts Center does on a given night in downtown Providence. How do we lean into the arts? It'll never be the super sector that the blue economy is, but is there a way to make Rhode Island the Austin, Texas of the East or something like that?
Absolutely. It's such a really good point. My husband works at RISD. He started an entrepreneurship program there. And so, what he often is really engaged in is working with these young artists who want to start businesses and helping them think about their business model. And, we have so many things going for us. One of the things that has been a really interesting bright spot coming out of COVID, if you could say this, is the number of people who've left New York City and come to Providence and come to other cities and towns. Now, it puts some pressure on us in some ways, but it brings a lot of vibrancy. Mm-hmm. And so there are many things that we could do. A film tax credit. We used to have more vibrancy around the film industry. And so that's a place I think we could lean back into. Even something like the historic tax credit, it may not sound like whether that's connected to the arts, but to me it is. We have a beautiful landscape in Rhode Island, and we want to make sure that we hold on to that because I think it's one of the ways we capture more of this creative expertise that we have. So I would love more ideas. I would be asking everyone who's on your podcast, what's the one thing you would do if you were governor? Because I bet there are a lot of really good ideas on that.
Lightning round here because we're almost out of time. Superman building, satisfied with the state's position right now as juxtaposed against the developer, and is it the right way to go about this type of project? Everybody knows that it'd be better if the Superman building was lit up and there was activity downtown, but is this the right way to do it?
I'm really glad that something's happening. I think it's terrible to look at a dark building, and it's been dark for 7 years, I believe. I'm nervous. I'm nervous about, I don't understand all the contract. I think Rhode Islanders should be able to see everything and know what we hold as risk. And so I would like to understand that more. I'm also leery that the affordable housing element of this is really affordable. So I think that is something that is probably not as robust as it should be. But overall, let's hope we can make something happen in that building. Yeah,
I saw something like the affordable units will be $1,200, which is certainly less than the $1,800 that the average Providence apartment is. Still is probably not what a lot of people are looking for.
It's 50% of the income if you look at the people who of the net income of people who can apply for it. So that's very expensive for those folks.
Tidewater Landing. How do we go about this? Expanding the TIF. The project has been reduced in terms of its scope. What's the next move there in terms of, is it something we should even be doing?
Well, Pawtucket is a place where we have really, we've left the people of Pawtucket behind. Look, losing whatever your beliefs were on the stadium, Worcester is now booming, and Pawtucket is a geography where we need to support the city. So I would love to see something really exciting happening there. The thing I'm very uncomfortable with is the idea of separating the stadium itself from the rest of the development, which is, I believe, where the governor's going at this point. To me, that strikes me as a very dangerous path, because to approve a standalone stadium with pretty high ticket prices and not a great business model on its own, when you don't have all the surrounding pieces, doesn't seem like the way to go. So what I would be doing is pulling together every single option that I could, out shopping the proposal, working with the mayor, figuring out what more we could do to attract a really robust model, because Pawtucket is spectacular. I mean, back to what we were just talking about in terms of the buildings, the river, the people. There's a vibrancy of the arts culture there. I just was at Culture Fest a couple weekends ago. There's a lot of great things going on. So we need to figure out how to bring more life back to Pawtucket.
Yeah, it does seem like in the stadium project, I mean, I know that they've been in there long days, long nights trying to develop it, whether it's former Commerce Secretary Pryor, the McKee administration. They are trying to find ways to do it. So you're saying that decoupling let's say just the housing element from the stadium itself, that wouldn't be an option that you would sign off on, even if that meant the project's vitality was in question.
I'm really worried you'd do a standalone stadium building and not get anything else, and you'd be, we could be here a decade from now looking at an isolated stadium sitting there with nothing around it, and I think that would be a very bad outcome for Pawtucket and the state.
Last question here. Endorsements, I mean, it is what it is. Do you have anybody? You don't even have to necessarily commit to an endorsement. You certainly can if you'd like to. Do you have anybody that you are behind, supporting formally, out in front of, in terms of the congressional race, the lieutenant governor, in terms of the treasurer, primary? Where do you stand on that? I
am focused on the people of Rhode Island. I really am. I'm not to avoid the question, but I'm seriously just out meeting people every single day, and I'm listening to them. I love their votes, and I'm meeting all the other politicians. We run into each other a lot, but at the end of the day, what I really care deeply about is making sure that the people of Rhode Island understand I bring a fresh perspective, and I'd love to be able to serve them.
Do you feel like you understand the landscape now in terms of who all of the players are? And I oftentimes, Dan McGowan of the Boston Globe, and I had this idea a couple of years ago to make baseball cards of Rhode Island political and media and whatnot people. You could open it up. It's like, oh, wow, I've got the Ed Fitzpatrick hologram card, whatever it may be. Do you understand who the players are at this point? Do you think you have a sense of this weird world that we're in?
Yeah, look, it's weird, but it's not that complicated.
And That's right.
I would say that, look, I've been through the whole process now, and it's been a great experience to get out and to meet people. But I would also tell you that many of these endorsements just don't matter. So, you look at the state Democratic convention, that was a lot of, inside baseball. And at the end of the day, the next day, the poll came out and said, Helena's surging. Mm-hmm. So I think at the end of the day, what matters is how do I connect with voters? And that's what I'm really focused on.
Helena Buonnano Foulkes running for governor in less than 2 months. We'll have the primary here. And, of course, early voting begins a month from. Everything's a time warp here in the summer. So it's happening now. Get ready, people.
Thank you so much, Bill. Really fun to be with you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.